Nigeria, of course, being one of the countries that attended the G20 Foreign Affairs meeting that was held here in Johannesburg. Nigeria is considered one of the key economies on the African continent. SABC News international reporter Khayelihle Khumalo is standing by with the Nigeria Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuggar, with the latest on that. Nigeria, quite a critical voice, Khayelihle, on the continent, quite a critical economy on the continent as well. Talk to us a bit about Nigeria's sentiments, of course, on this important meeting that took place, and perhaps how, from the discussions, the participants are able to move forward on a number of key issues.
Well, absolutely, Criselda. When you talk about the African continent, when you talk about the engines of growth in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, very key economies. And obviously, when you look at South Africa's G20 priorities, resonating really with the African continent, when you talk about the issues pertaining to climate change, we know really is having quite a severe impact in the continent, but also by all means across the world. But joining us now is, of course, Minister Tuggar. Ambassador, obviously quite a very important moment for the African continent. We saw that you had a bilateral meeting with your counterpart, Minister Lamola, but take us through to your presence here to the G20 summit for the foreign affairs ministers and just the significance for the African continent.
Well, Nigeria is here on invitation of South Africa, that is currently chairing the presiding over the G20, and we are very grateful for being invited. Nigeria is becoming a regular invitee to the G20, and it is our hope that we will also, like South Africa, become a member of the G20. If you notice, other continents have more than one country representing them. If you look at South America, you've got Argentina, you've got Brazil. Look at North America, you've got the US, you've got Mexico. If you look at, of course, Asia, India, China. But the African continent is the only one that has South Africa and more recently the African Union. But then you've got the European Union in there as well. So Africa is a continent of 55 nations. So we need that presence, and we're happy that South Africa has come up with this theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, which is very important. And we are working closely with South Africa and other countries in pushing this agenda of a reform of the global financial architecture, as well as the political structure where it pertains to the United Nations Security Council.
Minister, obviously this happened amid all these geopolitical developments, whether you're looking at Russia-Ukraine conflict, you look at the new administration in Washington, D.C., but right in our shores in the African continent, a very untenable situation in Sudan, the eastern part of DRC. So I would imagine that, like the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, that the G20 countries, they should really lead in terms of providing solutions. But of course, like you say, that you aspire to join for Africa to eventually silence these guns at some point.
We would rather that Africa and the African Union and other platforms that are owned by Africa and African countries be utilized in solving these problems. And when we prefer solutions that others outside of Africa support those solutions, they tend to be more effective as opposed to exogenous solutions to African problems. So we just concluded recently Peace and Security Council meeting where we deliberated on the conflict in the Sudan and Eastern Congo. So we expect that other members of the G20 and others outside of Africa would support the solutions that we're preferring. Certainly we need them to play a role, but let the solutions organically emanate from Africa as opposed to being applied from the outside, because we know where it hurts the most.
And Minister, while we have you, what do you make of South Africa's priorities? I mean, when you talk about debt sustainability, when you talk about harnessing the minerals, the critical minerals, to beneficiate right in our shores, as opposed to taking them out of the continent, and then they come back 10 times more in terms of the cost. What do you make of these priorities? I mean, surely they do resonate with sub-Saharan Africa, given all the resources that we have.
Absolutely. This is a noble cause that we have all signed on to, and we're happy to see South Africa championing it under its leadership of the G20 when it comes to the issue of debt. And of course, that also dovetails into the African Union's theme, which is reparations, because then we can think of more interesting ways of applying reparations by way of debt, the issue of debt. So we are advocating for special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund, same way it was applied during the COVID pandemic, which is not going to increase any debt on any African country, but these are the sort of clever ways that funding can be provided for the energy transition, for instance, which is very expensive, the transfer of technology that was promised by the rich countries back in Rio in 1992, that really nothing has been done about it. So you can apply these sort of mechanisms to ensure that you give. In real terms, we're contributing precious little to the pollution of the planet, and all the climate change issues. Really, they're not coming from us. So we need for the developed countries, for the global north, to support the global south in tackling these sort of problems.
And just once again, Minister, Africa-Nigeria bilateral relations. I mean, we're so present to Nubi in Cape Town for the Binational Commission. How do you aim to make sure that you elevate these ties? Because these are very key economies for sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, this is where on how Minister Lamola and I have our work cut out for us, and the rest of our colleagues. So when the heads of state meet and they give the direction, then we have to follow, and you can see in the collaboration going on. We work well together, and when Nigeria and South Africa collaborate, then you can see that a lot of Africa's problems get solved, because you've got that solid foundation of two great African nations working together. You mentioned critical minerals. We want to see more of metals refining on the African continent, metals processing, which requires a lot of energy, but then we have the energy as well, which is why Nigeria considers gas a transition fuel. We don't want it to be labeled as a polluter, because it's a cleaner fuel than other hydrocarbons, and you need a lot of energy for the metals refining, for refining critical minerals before they are exported, instead of just taking out lithium to other countries to be refined and then sold back to us, as well as other countries around the world. Let us do it on the African continent. And then with energy also, we tackle, or we position ourselves to supply much needed electricity to data miners, artificial intelligence, data storage. All of that consumes a lot of electricity, and Africa has a lot of energy.
And maybe before I let you go, Minister, the issue around the United Nations Security Council, the reforms. We know already Mr. Guterres is saying it's outdated, and the current realities, they've changed from 1945. And we know with Africa, when it comes to a linear consensus around those two permanent seats, South Africa, Nigeria, could they be potentially representing the African continent, but of course making sure that they have all the powers, the veto powers, to make sure that they're just like the P5?
Absolutely. I mean, having a permanent seat without the veto powers, it's just, giving with one hand and taking with the other. So what's worth doing is worth doing well. And countries like Nigeria, like South Africa, have earned to belong to the UN Security Council as permanent members with veto powers, and we're hoping for that, because without that, then we're still stuck with an anachronistic 20th century contraption. This is the 21st century, and it's the century of Africa.
All right. Minister, thank you so much indeed for your time. Of course, that's the Nigerian Foreign Affairs Minister, Khayelihle, really talking about a number of issues post that all-important conference with the Foreign Affairs meeting here in South Africa, really looking at all the critical global issues and, of course, the first for the African continent.